Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I have Vicki Goodman with us today. I want you to know she has something to share that is timely for many people today. So I think that what we discussed is going to be very important. I also want to remind you that you can go to wmfestivalbooks.org and be able to download the forms for the Writers Conference, for the Writers Contest, and for the Festival of Books. Now, Vicki, I want to remove this person here because we don't want him. Let's see.
I feel bad for him.
Yeah. But we do want him recording. So, Vicki, you had some experiences when you lost your husband. And you shared those and the wisdom from other people that you talked about in an article that's going to be coming out in the Transcendent Authors newsletter. I just lost my brother last week. And a very dear, dear friend of mine, she lives in Israel, and they have just a very, very complicated medical system. It's socialistic, but it's beyond that. I mean, their doctors are excellent, their research and that, but I'm going to send that article to her because it will bring her comfort. She lost her mother and her brother simultaneously.
I'm so glad that article is helping.
Yeah. And so tell me how all of this came about. I know it started with the loss of your husband. And
yes.
How long ago was that, and how long were you married?
Sam passed about 5.5 years ago, and we were married almost 22 years. We got married rather late in life. He was almost 50, and I was about 42. But we had a good 21 and a half years together.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And what happened was we were both, Sam and I, raised very secular. We had begun to believe in a higher power sometime a few years before his illness, his cancer. But neither one of us had taken that very far. The reason we decided there must be a higher power is because it just no longer made any sense that all of this around us that we see could possibly have just happened on its own. But we hadn't taken the belief system very far. It remained pretty rudimentary. After Sam passed, suddenly I started thinking more about God. And part of the reason for that was on the very day he died, I was suddenly flooded with optimism, and it was unseemly, really. I thought, what's going on here? I lose the love of my life, and suddenly, there's sunshine coming through the clouds on that very day. It didn't seem right. So my first instinct was to push it away. But instead, I thought back on our 2 years from diagnosis till his passing, how strong I'd been, and how I'd taken very good care of him at the end when he needed taking care of, and I'm not the caregiver type. So I thought if good things want to come my way, even on the day Sam passed, maybe I should let them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the best decision I could have made. So here I am on the day he passes, and I'm flooded with optimism, but there was another element to it. I felt like I was being not pushed, but maybe led in a particular direction that I wouldn't have gone on my own. And I thought, it's almost like a helping hand is coming down. And I thought, must be Sam. He's already helping me from maybe the afterlife, if there is such a thing. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then I thought, well, maybe God. Regardless, I was being led, and I, the control freak, decided to let myself be led. I just let it happen. And
Oh,
it was such a good thing because insights were coming my way, serendipitous events I was noticing, opportunities to do really great fun things. And a lot of people when they lose a loved one, whether they want to or not, they don't allow themselves to grab those opportunities that might come their way. They think it's
mhm.
too soon because the culture conditions us to grieve a certain way. Some people interpret the timing as a few weeks, others a few months, others a few years. Some people remain kind of in a ball doing nothing for years after they lose a loved one. And I say that's time wasted because of the insights I've received, which we can talk about. So here I am. And what really got this going was the hospice we'd used offered me visits with their chaplain about once a month for an entire year after Sam passed. And I said yes to that. I'd met her, I liked her, and I thought that will be helpful. So the first thing I did when I met with her for the first time is I asked her about the afterlife. I said, "Tell me about the afterlife." And she told me some things that were pretty insightful. The best thing she told me was to read the story of a secular neurosurgeon who had had a near-death experience of his own. He was in a coma for 7 days um, from a brain infection. His colleagues at the hospital were taking care of him. They could not get the infection under control. Anyway, long story short, he was going to die from this infection, and it had already destroyed most of his brain, they told his family. Well, this was such a divinely inspired story because not only had he had no wound of the kind necessary to get this infection in the first place, but he comes back from it after they couldn't get the infection under control. He's got no brain damage. He resumes his career. He writes the book. He goes on speaking tours about this near-death experience. And I found his story so convincing that it took me the rest of the way from my rudimentary belief in a higher power to fully believing in God and an afterlife. And believe me, I thought to myself, maybe this maybe this belief feels powerful now and it'll kind of subside over time. It never did. 5.5 years later, here I am. And the insights I received, Kathleen, were really life-changing, perspective altering. They're about
I
death and loss, and really they can be applied to any adversity that we experience as human beings.
I can absolutely understand that. I have had some experiences myself, life changing. I've had some of it terrifying and some of it just overwhelmingly incredible to where you can't move, you can't it because you're still soaking in it. Um, but I also have had friends who have also had that same thing. I had a gentleman friend. He was an older man. I know he's passed by now because when I met him, he was 90. Um, and he was a retired fire captain from LA.
Mhm.
And he was married 3 times, but each wife died. He was married like 20, 25 years, and he was on wife number 3. But when one of his second wife, who he was married to the longest, passed away, he was standing in her grave, uh, feeling, desolate. And then he heard the voice of God, and God said, "My grace is sufficient for you."
Mm.
And it lifted all the grief, everything. And like you, he went on to find joy and to find experiences he had never had before, all because he listened, he was willing to listen and to hear and to be led. Um, I don't know if you've ever seen that poem. It shows footsteps walking in sand. In fact, it's called Footsteps in the Sand.
Hmm.
And there's a version where the footsteps are bigger and then there's smaller ones and they're walking along. Well, that's the original. Then the second one, and then there's just one, and that's when he's carrying you and all your problems. This is talking about the Lord. And
Right.
then there's one where it starts out together, but the feet are going around and around like in a waltz and stuff, and then alone, and then all of a sudden the feet are there again. And the person asks God, what's going on with this? And he says, that's when we danced.
Oh,
That's when
yeah,
we danced.
that's really beautiful.
And that
Yeah.
makes me think of you. What happened? You started dancing without even realizing it.
I did. And what was great about it was it's not that I didn't grieve. I did grieve for Sam. In fact, in the evenings, I remember it was the hardest. Whatever I'd been doing all day long, I'd come home and feel like even though I'd had all this fun, nothing had any meaning because Sam wasn't there to share it with, either to do it with him or to tell him about it afterwards. So, it was most apparent at that time of day that here I was alone in my house that I'd shared with him, and that felt so different. And so I think that's the part that we all have to process when we
Mm-hmm.
lose someone, especially someone we shared our life and our home with, a spouse. And, what I did was I sort of knew instinctively that I should establish a balance between all these fun activities, the singing, the playing in the orchestra. I auditioned and got a part in a staged reading. I started traveling to exotic places, in some cases, places that I knew Sam would never have wanted to go. And I was doing all these things, but I also made sure that I ignored certain advice I was getting. People were telling me, just stay as busy as possible so you don't have time to think or feel. And I knew that however well intended that advice was, that it was bad advice because I knew I needed to process what had happened to my life. So even though pretty early on, I knew Sam was in the afterlife and knew he was still around, and I even have manifestations of that occurring. So even though I knew that, I still needed to process
Oh,
the
yeah.
changes because as human beings, we're sort of afraid. We don't like change. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of uncertainty. And when your life is changing by no decision of your own, you're faced with uncertainty and the unknown. We don't like that, most of us. So, yeah, we have to process everything. So, I called it establishing a balance between activity and quiet time. And the quiet time could even be spent with a friend hiking or taking a walk or by myself or just reading, but not with a lot of input coming in.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea behind the quiet time. And it really worked for me. And it even got put to the test when COVID came a few months after Sam passed. All of a sudden I was spending, the balance was upset. I was spending way too much time by myself. And that made it a whole lot harder, even though a few months had already gone by.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so I wrote the book 2 years after Sam passed because I looked back on the prior 2 years that had been overall so fantastic. And I thought this story could help others, regardless of their belief system, because I want to make the book, I want to tell the story of me as an example of how to brilliantly move forward while grieving, begin moving forward into that next chapter of life. And people have told me the book is so uplifting. They expected something depressing, and they said, it wasn't. It was even really funny in places. So, it's a good read overall. And and it's called To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. But the best insights that with which I was blessed really came after I wrote the book. I'm thinking of doing a second edition or something so that I can include them. But in the meantime, I've got them in 3 audio episodes, and the best of the 3 audio episodes is the second one, the middle one, and that'll be in the article that you were talking about. That'll be in the magazine. But basically, the best of those insights is I ask myself, is death really tragic? And I say no.
No.
In fact, it's a cause for celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about a celebration of life. That's a wonderful thing to do. I had actually 2 of them for Sam. I'm talking about the actual death itself being a cause for celebration. And the reason for that is if you have the belief system that I'm finding most people have, that there's a loving God and a gorgeous, stunning, beautiful afterlife where souls are surrounded by a love so powerful we can't even begin to comprehend it here on earth. If that's true, and if we believe that God has a plan for each one of us, then the plan in my case was for Sam to pass after we'd been married about 21 and a half years, and for me to join him in the afterlife later. And in
Mm-hmm.
the meantime, God has a plan for me to do more, to
Mm-hmm.
experience more, learn more, maybe even to teach others.
Mm-hmm.
So, if this is the case, why do so many people who have this belief system, I tell them this insight and they nod their heads knowingly? Yet they still grieve hard, many of them, or they become so sad for someone they know who has lost someone. So I think it's the fact that we don't connect the dots between the cultural conditioning that tells us to grieve a certain way for a certain length of time, to consider a death as tragic. We don't connect the dots between that and this wonderful belief system that if we just connected those dots would alleviate so much of the pain and have us moving into that next chapter of life, which can be so fulfilling and exciting much more quickly. So others have said to me, but I would feel guilty not grieving for a particular amount of time. I believe my husband is up there, or my wife is up there in the afterlife watching. I want to pay due honor to my loved one's memory. And I say, your loved one wants you to move forward as quickly and as best as possible and be as
Mm-hmm.
happy as possible. And the way I know that is from something I read from the neurosurgeon. If there is a love so, he didn't say this, but I extrapolated it from what he said about that all-encompassing, powerful love that we can't imagine here on earth. If that's the case, and souls are surrounded by that, then there are no negative emotions in the afterlife. There's
Mm-hmm.
no anger. There's no anger. There's no jealousy. Nothing like that. The souls of our loved ones just want us to be happy. So one woman says, well, I thought about maybe having another relationship, but then, what if it becomes sexual, and my husband is up there watching from the afterlife? I said, he is watching, or he would be watching, and he would be cheering you on.
Mm-hmm. Because just as you think he months we're supposed to grieve, they are watching, praying that we move on and celebrate. But my personal opinion, one of the biggest things that makes it difficult for people, yes, it's connecting the dots, but one of the dots people have to realize is just that for I have only lived alone, no children, no husband, alone for probably 6 months of my life. All the other time, I've had somebody. Like when my husband was overseas for 2 years and another for a year, it was me and the kids, but I wasn't alone. And that's the dot that brings the sorrow. It's, you can have the joy of people um, being in the presence of God, rejoicing, walking the streets of gold, you know, singing, what their voices lifted up.
Mhm.
But when you're sitting there alone and they're not in their chair, it's it's that conditioning of having somebody with you. When my sister's husband died years and years ago, she says, I just don't know how I can cope. I've never been alone.
Right,
And I said, you have to learn. You have to learn to like your own company. It's not a case,
right.
you have to develop, because one of the things that I found that over the years, and you probably have too, especially now, but when we are with someone, a spouse, as women, we're taught to be caregivers, whether we are or not, whether it's a talent or a gift or not. We are taught to do that. Um, when we don't have somebody to care for, because all this time we've been caring for them and not us.
Yeah.
We
See,
we do.
well, what I wanted to say, Kathleen, is I'm really glad you brought this up, actually. I addressed it a little bit in my book. The thing about adversity of all kinds, and this is another insight I had, actually, God is teaching us lessons when he presents us
Mhm,
with adverse events. And so part of his plan for someone, the kind of person you described, um, someone who has been taught to be a caregiver and sort of selfless and put everyone else first before themselves. God is giving them an opportunity to learn, as you say, how to be alone, but also how to be maybe more caring of themselves.
mhm,
See, I say whenever you're presented with anything adverse, whether it's something trivial like a flat tire or something big like your house burning down, to even the death of a loved one, when you're presented with adversity, one of the first things that I now do, I've taught myself to do this, is to look for the lesson. God is teaching us
ah,
something. And I almost always figure it out immediately. In my case, I'm kind of a type A. It's what my second book that just came out is about, being a life as a type A personality. In my case, I'm very impatient, always have been. God is presenting me with obstacles in life to teach me patience. And now that I've largely learned that lesson, at least to the extent I think I'm capable of it, he's presenting me with other challenges for for me to learn from. And so I say, instead of getting so upset over these things that happen to all of us in life, we think are so negative and so terrible, maybe not so terrible. You know how things always work out well, better than you think when adverse
mhm,
events happen? Well, not only that, but there's a lesson in it. Look for the takeaway and learn.
mhm, mhm. Oh,
It's
I
about
believe
growth.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe that. I had some lessons in learning to hear the voice of God, and it was hard, you know, to make sure that I'm hearing correctly and telling somebody something, and they're like, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Uh, he told me, and this is what he wants to do with you." And it's, but it's hard to learn patience, to learn those things and get
Yeah.
to the point that you are walking beside instead of behind or instead of in front of. If you are walking in step, dancing, if you will, like you, I'm an A. I can be a B, depending upon the situation, personality. But when it comes to dancing, I'm an A. I taught myself how to dance by myself. So it's extremely difficult for me to follow anyone when I dance.
I know what you mean. I've heard a lot of women say that they have trouble following the man who's leading, unless the man is a really, really outstanding dancer. They
Hmm.
have a way, and I once danced, and the reason I know this is because I once danced with somebody a long time ago at some sort of company retirement party or something. And this man was such a fantastic dancer that he made me look like I knew how to dance when I hadn't a clue. Yeah. And so you can't help following someone like that. But the average dancer, yeah, you have to let them lead.
Yes, yes. And it's, I the only time that I was actually taught to follow was when my dad taught me to swing dance. So I will follow a swing dancer. But anything else, I did meet one kid. I was stationed at Randolph Air Force Base, and it was in the Airmen's Club, and we would get together. Never really knew him. We just danced, and this is during Saturday Night Live. Whoa, whoa, doing doing those.
Yeah.
And but people would clear off when we'd start dancing because I could follow him. But I think he was like that person you were just describing,
He knew
that
how to
he
dance.
he really knew how to dance. And man, we just had a ball. Um,
Isn't it fun?
it
Isn't it
is.
fun when you've put no effort into learning how to dance and then you get this undeserved experience of looking like you're the best dancer in the world because he's that good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
win that dancing contest.
Oh gosh.
Oh, you know,
I
I
know.
I know I really believe that your your book and this article that you've written for us is going to reach a lot of people. And I believe it's going to help several. Like I said, it's when I read it, it just was very timely because of the loss of my brother. And it also explained why I grieved when my parents died. But you know what really made me grieve was the fact that I realized I was an orphan.
What?
When both your parents die,
Yeah, oh yes. Okay.
yeah,
Now I know what
I
you're,
was,
yeah.
yeah, I was an orphan. My sisters and my brother were orphans, and I didn't have that wisdom to draw on. And in that instance, reading your article made me realize I was lying to myself. I had somebody to go to for advice. I
Wow.
did, yeah, because he's my father. So it just kind of solidified a lot of things for me in my life
Wow.
over the loss of these three people. And I know I'm at a certain age that I'm vulnerable, and my older sisters are vulnerable to being gone, and I'm preparing myself for that. At the same time, I'm loving my life
Do
and
you
what we
find that
have.
having Do you find that having this belief in God, maybe you've always believed in God, but having been raised secular, I can compare the two. And I used to be afraid to die. And now that I fully believe in God and an afterlife, I don't want to die anytime soon because, I want to write a children's book and I want to, travel a few more places and blah, 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 all those things that I still want to do,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not afraid to die.
Yeah.
It's a
Um,
huge difference.
yeah, I wasn't, I knew I was raised Christian Scientist, which is metaphysical training.
Hmm.
And I always knew God the Father. I never knew the Holy Spirit. I never knew Jesus. I knew him in the sense that, yeah, we celebrate Easter, but not the significance of it. It wasn't until actually I watched a girlfriend of mine and she had such peace in the middle of turmoil. I decided, well, I guess I just need to get baptized and that would do it. Well, of course it didn't because that has to be done with the purest intentions. But it was over the years, it wasn't until I was like 38, 39 that I truly became aware of the many facets of God and started hearing his voice and seeing some things that I had never seen before. So it took a lot, but it was always, I could feel his presence always when I was walking. I've had terrifying experience. I had a guy that I was going to training at Chanute Air Force Base, and the dormitory for the women, there were 10 of us and 10,000 guys um, in one building, and across it was where we could park our cars if we had one. And that the like the center place that women would go for their vacations or not their vacations, but their leaves and time off and stuff like that. If they had any problems. Well, I was walking from my car and went to cross the street, and this guy, he was a civilian. He had the hairiest face. He looked like Wolfman,
Mhm.
on the
Scary.
movies.
Yeah.
Terrifying. And every time I made a step towards the sidewalk to cross the street, he moved the car and blocked me. And it kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And then another car came by and got behind him, and he had to go on. And then I
Wow.
got in. And that just, things like that scared the snot out of me
Would
because I
scare
didn't,
anyone.
yeah, but I didn't know that there were powers to be that have a plan for us. Like you said, there is a reason for every single life on earth. I believe that.
Yeah, I do too.
You just have to ask because you don't. One of the things that, do you remember, oh, what's his name? He wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. He wrote also another book before that. It was called The Aladdin Factor. It's out of print right
Hmm.
now. And all it is all about is nothing happens unless you ask.
Hmm.
If you asked, you wanted to know when you talked to that chaplain. You asked and you got an answer.
And I got, yeah, and a recommendation to read that story that changed my life.
Hmm. And
And
if
in
you
my
hadn't asked,
experience, yeah, in my experience, when something changes you that radically, it sometimes, most of the time, it hasn't stuck. You know, this stuck.
hmm
Yeah, it stayed with me forever. I never even took a step backward from that new belief system, which surprised me.
I,
So, yeah.
I think deep down you knew that there was that calling from you inside. And that's why you were very receptive and you it's kind of like a coating on you, a stick to itiveness, if you will. Some people in the faith circles would call it an anointing from God to share a
Mhm.
message that people listen to, with whether they want to or not, they actually hear what you're saying. So,
Yeah.
because
Well, yeah, I consider myself the messenger who
uh-huh,
has been the one chosen by God to get this message. I don't think any of this came from me. I think it all came from God.
mm-hmm,
Chose me as the messenger, maybe because, it's especially convincing because I was raised so secular, maybe because I speak fairly well and I write quite well, and I have the ability therefore to get the message out. And what's really nice for me about this is I've always considered myself a little bit self-involved, primarily because of some things that happened early in childhood, which we need not go into. But I've never been one to volunteer or to really give back in any meaningful way. And that's always been a source of guilt for me. Well, this was a way that God provided for me to finally give back in a way that feels right to me.
mm-hmm.
And it's been a lot of work. I have to say, I didn't think my retirement would look like this, but I have I have no regrets because it feels right. And
Yes.
if I can start a movement for people to start connecting those dots between the cultural conditioning and the truth about God and the afterlife, and that there's a plan for all this to happen, and that it was always meant to happen this way. We didn't get unlucky.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing like unluckiness about it. It was a
Mm-hmm.
plan. I wasn't meant to have Sam with me longer than I did.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing terrible happened. It was always meant to be. And that's what's so powerful about this and what is so freeing. If you realize that it was supposed to happen this way and that there
Mm-hmm.
were other things for you to do afterwards, then then just embrace it and move on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Vicki, I can't thank you enough for the article and for joining me today and letting me talk with you candidly about this situation, about the situation everybody's going to have to face sometime or another.
Yes.
And it's going to give people something to hang on to for that moment.
Yes. I hope so. Sure helped me.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. At the end, you'll see a panel that will have all the information on how to contact Vicki if you would like to, if you want to know more, and the title of her books. By the way, when is your next book coming out?
It just came out. It's
Oh,
available. In fact, you might have information for your show notes that is a little old. Actually, the place to go now is VickiParisGoodman.com. Vicki, Vicki, Paris, like the city in France, Goodman.com. And both books are there discounted over what you'd buy them for at Amazon or somewhere else. Um, so the new book about the type A personality is called Speed Bumps and Other Impediments to Life in the Fast Lane. And it's a little self-deprecating because, as I said, I'm a little ashamed of my type A impatience and a few other things. So it's kind of funny and kind of heartfelt, and just the experience of having been a type A in so many ways. And the reason I wrote it is so that other type A's will have some way to know that they're not alone. All these things others experience, me in spades. And for type B's who might have type A's in their lives, to finally understand the motivations and behaviors that they've been scratching their head over for years. So both of those books are available. Now, the way to get to the audio episodes, they're about 12 to 15 minutes each, is to go to VickiParisGoodman.com and go to the menu and click on Inspired Grief. And that'll take you to where you can get the audio episodes.
thank you so much. And I will update that information because I'll get the new one from you, all of that
Yeah,
information.
right.
So Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I will be bringing another guest that I'm sure you're going to love just as much as you love Vicki. Thank you and see you next time. Bye bye.